Right, let's find out what's happening with Apple, because Apple's taking the unprecedented step of removing its highest level data security tool from customers in the UK after the government demanded access to user data. Now, I clocked this story at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was on my Apple phone because I couldn't sleep and I was scrolling and I saw this and I panicked. I have loads of Apple products, but I'm very worried now. How worried should I be? Let's talk to somebody who can talk us through this. Welcome to the show, Graham Stewart, who's head of public sector at cybersecurity company Checkpoint. Graham, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So listen, please explain to us non-techies who are now panicking what is going on here and how big a deal is it?
Okay, well, you kind of hit the nail on the head with what's happened here. So in 2022, Apple delivered a bumped up level of encryption, which meant that your files and your messages were not able to be read even by Apple. So between you and the people you were sharing it with, there was nobody else that could see that. And what that means is, and at first glance, this is really easy because it means that your stuff is really super secure. And what's happened is that the UK government has asked for the ability to interrogate and open the data. And the argument is that they want to use it to intercept communications, paedophile groups, terrorists, that kind of stuff. And you go, at first glance, that makes a huge amount of sense. And there's kind of no bad things here. But, and here's the thing, there's a question here. So privacy groups would argue that you have a right to privacy. So there's no reason for government to be looking at your communications. And why should they? They're your communications. But clearly, they feel there's a very good reason for doing so.
Yes. And I suppose it's difficult, isn't it? Because the sort of the kind of public spirited governmenty person in my head is going, well, surely if there's bad things going on and the government needs, or the security services, whoever needs access to things, then that's fine. But I suppose there is also the civil liberty stuff and these powers. Are people anxious that these powers could be abused? Is it likely to affect the ordinary person? Or is the argument if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to fear?
And that's the classic argument, right? And I mean, Ben Wallace was on social media earlier on today saying the people who love encryption are paedophiles. And there is an argument that says if you've done nothing wrong, then you've got nothing to fear. The problem comes in four areas, and the things to think about here come in four areas. The first one is what I would loosely term as abuse of power. So governments and law enforcement over the years don't have a spotless record in terms of misusing information and misusing intelligence. So this means you have to have super robust oversight and controls around this process to make sure that this isn't being abused. The second thing is anything that fundamentally weakens encryption is a bad thing. And it's not just in this space, but any space. Encryption is the thing we rely on for banking, for commerce, for protecting critical national infrastructure. Anything that increases the likelihood of that getting hacked and that being damaged is a bad thing. The third area to consider is if the UK government, it makes it okay for the ability to intercept people's private information, it kind of makes it more likely for other regimes to do the same. And even in Europe, there are other more authoritarian regimes that are less press friendly, that are more likely to go after opposition groups. And so there's some key bits here, but the final point here is this concept, and we talk about this quite a lot, particularly and recently around AI. There's this idea of legislative lag in that it takes governments a long time to get its head around technology and the implications of it. I mean, the thing that makes me smile around this is in 1964, someone that got caught doing 184 mile an hour on the M1. And it took them 3 years to bring in Barbara Castle to bring in mandatory speed limits. So, we have history here, not just in the frame of technology. So it comes down to this. If you believe that there is going to be no abuse of power and that the oversight is there, then this should not be a problem. But it just sits uncomfortably with civil liberties groups and privacy groups saying, your communications are yours and it should be protected. And it's that legislative lag and it's that oversight piece that needs to be got right here, because otherwise you're opening Pandora's box.
And just in terms of, for us sort of mere mortals who are not doing anything particularly naughty, I mean, if anyone hacked my messages, they'd be so completely bored.
Absolutely. I'm sure there's nothing in there of any interest by your children and anyone else. But yeah.
Oh, they're just like very, very dull. However, I suppose many of my listeners might be thinking, does this mean the security of our devices are compromised? Will it perhaps be easier to hack our devices or, try and access our banking details or anything like that?
And that's it. Anything that fundamentally weakens encryption, which is the bedrock of the internet, is a bad thing. And let's, if you take a step back and look at this, most people have heard of the Telegram app, which is a messaging app that was created by in 2014, and that uses end-to-end encryption. Okay, which means that it's impossible for anyone but the sender and the recipient to read that email, that message. And there's been all kinds of kerfuffle around it, and the Durov brothers, a pair of Russian nationals that left Russia, invented this, and they got into terrible trouble with the Russians because they wanted to basically insert a back door so that they could get hold of these messages. Now, the thing with Telegram is I was talking to someone earlier on about Telegram, and this is a good example of the problem, is they said, oh, isn't that messaging service used by drug dealers? And you go, well, I have heard of that being used for it like that, but it's also used by the Ukrainians to put out messages about what's going on in the war.
Right, okay.
And the reason they use it is because you can't adulterate the content, which means you can't, the Russians couldn't, for argument's sake, mess with the messages, change the messages, impersonate someone, something like that. So the encryption is a fundamental piece of our internet environment, and anything that weakens it, be it in a messaging app or be it in banking, is a bad thing. And so those of us in the industry get very nervous about these types of things. So it comes back down to how you do it and the oversight, and people need to have really clear, eyes wide open view on this, because it has all sorts of potential for mischief and nefarious activity.
Graham, you were meant to cheer us up. The world is a scary place. I couldn't sleep last night because I was so stressed out about the world. Now I've spoken to you, now I'm even more worried. But that was you explained it really clearly. I hope the government enlists you to help them, because you sound like you know what's going on, to be quite honest.
Always welcome to get involved.
Graham, thanks very much for your time. That's Graham Stewart, who's head of a public sector at the cybersecurity company Checkpoint. Mike says, encryption, this nasty Labour government doesn't want you to have freedoms. Who knew? It is what it is, isn't it? Basically, just as if the world wasn't more uncertain, it's just going to get a bit easier to hack. That's nice news for everybody. Right, let's move on to equally chewy things. 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 Let's move on to